Yeah, so we can see her. Go and help her now.
All right.
See, we got new camera equipment over here too.
Oh, yeah.
Your face is down here
Yeah,
too.
she got that in just now, huh?
Yeah, every day we get more equipment.
You want my jacket? I'm hot. I can put it on your shoulders.
Come on, Claire, put it on your shoulder. It's chilly up here, Claire.
That's what I'm finding out. That's
It's
why-
chilly.
Come
Put
on over here.
that.
I'll
Sit
put
down
this
and put on
around
your
you.
shoulders. There's Claire, Dad. Look at there. Look at there. Look at there.
Where's
You
your
look,
sweater? Where's your
I'm gonna put
sweater?
this on her.
you look so nice
right
and
here.
green.
There.
Doesn't she look nice and green, Jen?
Yeah.
Yes, she does.
You look very nice.
There, go sit down, honey.
You look very nice and green, Claire.
Thank you, dear.
There.
As though it mattered what I looked like.
You doing all right today?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just give you an update. Is it running?
Yeah.
I'll just give you an update. My dad's overseas. He's in Wales at Haverford West, and they're training heavily to get ready to go to combat. But a couple Saturdays, they let the soldiers out to go in town, which is a small little mountain town, which had no action because they're like 200 miles away from London. And so that town was spared the fighting. And so they have, every Saturday, they have in town musicians that play the Glenn Miller music. So my father went there both Saturdays, and he met some lady named Jean, Jean, Jean. And Jean and her, he was walking her home because there's no street lights and everything's pitch dark. So he met some lady named Jean. So that's where we're at right now. Jean said she'd like to walk me back to the billets, and that if I was all right with me, I smiled and related to her that it'd be an honor and privilege unless she would rather go back to the dance. She said no, dancing does not interest me much, and besides, the band wasn't that great. I love Glenn Miller music. I agreed with her that the band was chopping up some of Miller's greatest hits, and that was only one of the reasons I did not stay for more than the same. As we walked, I would get a glimpse of her, and the moon darted and the clouds. At one point, I deliberately aimed my flashlight toward her feet with the pretext of aiding her as we walked at the blacked out streets. I also noticed Jean appeared to be more dressed up today than last week, and the description fits what I noticed, that she looked more alluring than the first time I had met her. She was dressed differently, which enhanced her attractiveness and charm, and gave her the more sophisticated, pleasurable characteristics that I come to admire and look for in a woman.
Did you hear the Spitfires going over?
What's that?
Did you hear the Spitfires going over?
Yeah, the Spitfire.
Going over to bomb Germany?
Yeah. We reached their billets and we stood there. I suggested we walk to her home and take some more and get better acquainted. She liked the idea, and I followed up winding road to the next tier cottages. As we walked, I grasped her hand and turned her head somewhat to me, and the two J's. They call them the two J's because his is John and hers was Jean with a J, so the two J's. For the same reason I liked it, and suddenly I felt kinship for this girl I had not seen only for a second time. Jean Rowland Young was her full Christian name, and she was a devout She was a devout Welsh Baptist who attended services regularly each Sunday morning and evening in one of the 4 churches in Haverford West. She had never been out of the immediate confines of the town, with only one exception. On her 16th birthday, her parents took her to London. She was not impressed and would not like living there, and she was perfectly content living here. She only had a few close friends who worked in her father's office. Besides her parents, they were only the source of her social contact. Jean stated rather matter-of-factly that she knew many people, but there were only a few that she could closely relate to, confide in, or talk to. I was getting the distinct impression that I was falling into the category, and I did not seem to resent it one bit. As a matter of fact, I was flattered and pleased that someone like Jean, from a different culture and background, would see in me something that was universal, the feeling of being that unites people no matter what their origin or background. As we made the sharp right turn on Parrots Road and Crow Hill from our shower building towards the last of the highest tiers in town, which led to Jean's cottage. The street was empty of foot traffic and occasional bicyclists. We walked in the middle of the street, hand in hand, talking and listening to what each other had to say regarding the varied subjects. I would reply and react to something strange or difficult in her culture compared to mine, and she would listen patiently and attentively. When I finished, she would go into lengthy discourse of why her way of life was superior. I did not admonish her or reject her way of thinking. Rather, it took her side on many issues we discussed. It was interesting as well as revealing to hear her talk about the growing up in a small town. She was evidently shy in school, or at least she thought so, and she did not like a formal setting that school afforded. Although she liked most of the subjects, English and history were her favorites. In her middle years, high school, she was the editor of the school newspaper. I told her that I could relate to her earlier school days, as I too was reserved and aloof in formal setting. She was not a bit surprised at my statement and quickly changed the subject to talking about how she liked the different seasons of the year. I was surprised at this and asked if she had ever had snow here. She replied that she's always seen snow twice that she could recall. I then went on to explain the definite change of seasons we had back home. She was amazed and bewildered of the amount of snow we had and a large swing in temperatures we experienced. Going down at times of 5 to 10 below zero, she was absolutely baffled when I mentioned the fact that the creeks would freeze over for several months in the winter and that we would play hockey on them from Thanksgiving to the end of March.
Yeah,
That's a long time, right?
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Were you good at hockey?
Yeah, they were lucky at a street light over the stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we played every night out there.
Did Uncle Steve play hockey?
Uncle Steve was in school.
How about Uncle Lookie? Did he play hockey?
He's wandering around someplace.
Okay.
I go pick him up somewhere.
Okay. She really had a difficult time perceiving this and was really mystified as how we survived all the long winter months. Her conception of home heating was fireplaces and potbelly stoves. Central forced air heat was completely arcane to her comprehension. We reached her home and we lingered at the front gate talking about many things, some that surprised her and others that she was in total agreement with. As we talked, I began to notice her and automatically began to compare her with Anne. Jean had dark hair that was barely touched her shoulders, and she was also a bit shorter than Anne. Her overall figure was not developed as Anne. I would say they had both attractive figures, and the only difference was how they dressed. We must have stood for over an hour in the front of her cottage, and then Jean casually remarked it was getting late. I took it as a hint and suggestion about to say goodnight and remarked, impulsively, "Would you like to meet my parents and listen to the nightly news on the BBC?" And the BBC radio stations are still playing today. BBC.
Oh, yeah. That's a big station.
Yeah. I recalled my thoughts several nights ago about how ideal it would be to visit Jean nightly. With that thought still fresh in my mind, I would like that, and perhaps she could plan for it. She shifted her foot about and then said, "How about tomorrow evening, about 19:30 hours? Would that be too presumptuous?" Without hesitating or any misgivings, I would say that would be fine, providing I did not have any detail. She said she understood and that she said goodnight, and I waited at the front gate as she ran to the front door, turned and waved as she entered. As I walked down to the billets, I reviewed in my mind what happened tonight. In a way, I was feeling guilty regarding Ann and our relationship, but again, I rationalized the entire situation and thought it'd be interesting to meet Jean's parents and once again to be a part of a family atmosphere in a strange country at that. I felt better. I was not really betraying my feelings for Ann, but was only reacting to a bit sincere hospitality from a visited country. Also, we would not be here much longer, and we were already in our second week and could possibly ship out in the next few days. I got to the billets and quietly gathered my towel and toilet articles and went back to the shower area to prepare for bed. The next day, we were out there the next day we were at the shooting range, familiarizing ourselves with our crew weapons. Lake wanted to know what happened to me when I left to take a shower, as he looked for me when I returned. I explained that I decided to walk down to the auditorium and I wait for Fink and him there, rather than the squad room. He accepted this and said nothing further about the events that night. We had several hours at the range, and we got through firing. We spent an additional hour or so cleaning our weapons. We marched to the mess hall that night under the light rain as we reached there and deposited our raincoats in the projection room while we ate. Fink and Lape talked about going to the auditorium that night, and they had a movie scheduled. I begged off, and as I'm rather tired, and I had probably seen the movie several times earlier already. Everyone left for the movie a little bit after 1900 hours, and I followed out a little later. I signed out of the orderly room, and Silent Whalen was there. He stated I better hurry, as I would miss the beginning of the movie. I added and left for the orderly room. When I got to the street, instead of turning right, I turned left on Barn Street, Jen, heading towards the shower area and ultimately to Jean's cottage. As I walked down the street, steep incline on Barn Street and Perwich Road, past the showers, I thought how strange it was. Once again, I was hurrying off to see someone, and it was not Ann. I wondered what she was doing at this very moment, and once again, pangs of guilt overcame me. My first impulse was to turn around and head back to the movie. Instead, I kept on going to the last tier of cottages. Before I knew it, I was standing in front of the gate at Jean's cottage. I stood there momentarily, not thinking of anything in particular, when suddenly the door opened and Jean was standing in the entrance, waving to me to come forward. As I reached the entrance, she grasped my hand and led me into the front parlor. My first impression was, from a very rapid and cursory glance about the room, was that it was indeed modest by comparison to what I had accustomed to at Ann's house. The rooms were small, sparsely furnished, in what seemed to have the appearance of an old-fashioned furniture, which was not contemporary as I had at home. There were small open fireplaces, all crackling away in each room, but one could still feel the dampness from the thick stone walls so prevalent throughout the country. The floors were bare with the exception of a few scattered rugs placed strategically about the rooms. The floors themselves were wood, made up of wood planking, scrubbed and polished to a deep, penetrating shine. The house itself had a strange aroma, which I never experienced before, a sort of a combination of carbon and steam, or perhaps of boiling water. Jean, still holding my hand, led me to the main part of the parlor, where her parents were seated. She introduced me once again A shiver of embarrassment overcame me as I fumbled for the appropriate words to say. Jean's father was short and stocky, with a full crop of heavy, thick black hair. As he smiled, I could not notice his teeth were dark grayish color. Jean's mother, rather taller than either Jean and her father, but slenderly built with all the typical English features. She greeted me warmly as she spoke. I again concentrate very intently, almost to the point of lip reading, to understand what they're saying, as her Welsh accent was overpowering and she had a tendency to talk very rapidly. Neither seemed put out by my presence there, and both, I thought, were quite natural and perfectly at ease as we talked and got acquainted. Jean's father was easier to understand as we talked much slower, as his Welsh accent was not pronounced as his wife's. Jean and I sat on a small couch opposite her parents. I could notice almost at once that Jean was completely dedicated to both of them, and her parents were equally devoted to her. I thought it strange that some families compel devotion and care for one another deeply, and other families are not as fortunate and must struggle throughout their lives, forever haunted and ridiculed by one another, never showing in their true affection that must be instilled in there, somewhere deep down in their psyches. Mrs. Young brought some tea and crumpets, small fry cakes, and tidbits. I attempted to balance and try to carry on a plausible and reasonable conversation with the two perfectly sincere and charming people. Jean would glance at me occasionally and smile, then turn to listen to what one of her parents was saying. At 21 hours, we listened to BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation from London, which gave us all the latest war news and casualties inflicted during air raids and bombings in London. It seemed that the British not only had to contend with nightly air raids over London and several port cities, but also daily occurrences of buzz bombs flying over England day and night. They were automatic, pilotless robot planes loaded with high explosive that would come down anywhere once they ran out of fuel. It was indiscriminate flights and would touch down that had the entire British population in complete terror. Jean's father was the mayor of Haverford West, or more correctly, his official title was Admiral of the Port. Haverford West was the area's administrative center and originally a Norman castle stronghold. It gradually evolved into a trading port, which thrived well into the advent of the railroad. The castle is now the most interesting museum. Jean's parents were completely engrossed in listening to the news and a final analysis of the day's event as far as war was concerned. They had no sons in the service, their only child, Jean, but both had relatives in the several branches of the service. They both suffered personal losses during the Blitz. Miss Young's younger sister and children were killed in the air raid outside London, and Mr. Young had a mother and brother killed when a buzz bomb landed in a little village near Swansea. As we talked, I became more relaxed, and it brought me back recollections when Anne first introduced me to her mother at home. Never in my wildest imagination would I believe that I could have repeat performance of that very same scenario. Whether it was on an omen of sorts, I could not speculate, but most certainly it appeared to have a lasting impression on me. I am not superstitious by nature, but the event had me casting doubts on my own aspirations. After the news, Jean suggested that we go for a walk before I went back to the billets. I said cordial good night to Mr. and Mrs. Young, thanking them for their gracious hospitality and mentioning that I would like to be invited back to some future date. They agreed and said they would look forward to seeing me again. As we reached the street and began walking, I took Jean's hand and remarked that she had extraordinary parents. I liked them already, only after the first visit with them. She was pleased, and I realized that she liked hearing complimentary remarks concerning her parents. While we walked and talked about many things, mostly of where we would be this time next year, and still be in touch with one another, Jean only sighed and remarked how beautiful the sky looked with a huge clouds rolled by momentarily and shutting out the light of the moon, and then once again reappearing, illuminating the darkest streets and houses. Overhead, still running?
Yep.
Overhead we could hear the heavy drone of many aircraft in the distance, and I could not tell in what direction they were headed. When we reached the end of the street, there were several straight back benches which overlooked the entire village of Haddonford West. As we sat there, we could see for miles. When the moon reappeared, it reminded me of the bluff at Owensboro and the lights of Evansville below. It became cool suddenly as a stiff breeze started to pick up from the west. I sat closer to Jean, put my arm about her, and moved in closer. She looked at me at the moment and suddenly bent down, kissed her, and held her for a moment in my arms. When I realized what I had just done, I quickly stammered an apology for my inappropriate actions and felt embarrassing as a loss of my sensible explanation for my behavior. She smiled and took my hand and said she had a beautiful time tonight, and I discerned her expression of goodness and quietly stated that I too had an enjoyable interlude and was pleased to meeting and talking with her parents, but mostly I liked being with her. She smiled again and said next time we meet we should take a picnic lunch and go bicycling to the park at the seashore. Do you remember all that?
Yeah, I remember that, yeah. Park at the seashore, yeah.
Okay. You're supposed to be at the war. It sounds like you're doing a lot of dating.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be at the war. It sounds like you're dating.
You're fine, that's
Claire,
fine,
Claire, just leave it there. Claire, we'll see you again. You have a nice evening. Jen will help you out.
Yeah.
Help her out, Jen.
Okay.
Good night, Claire.
Good night.
Nice to see you again.
Okay. Thank you.
Good night, Claire.
Good night, have a good one.
Used to go over to her.
One more
parents
time.
had have tea, crumpets.
One more time. Okay. Good night, Claire.
Night, Claire.
Let's just talk a little bit more about this now.
Tea and crumpets at her parents' house.
Yeah. I'm going to close the book for now. I want to hear about that. That sounds really interesting, being in a city like that where everything's dark and you meet nice people.
Yeah.
You're very lucky out of all that.
What?
Out of all those soldiers, you ended up to meet two nice people, mother and father.
Yeah, yeah.
You're very lucky.
He was a Boostermeyer, mayor in Haverford West.
You were extremely lucky. What's the chances of that?
Oh, Jesus, my poor book.
You're lucky. The book is getting used. That's what it's there for. That's what's there. It would be a poor book if it wasn't ripped up like this.
Yeah.
It'd be a poor book if it was neglected. Look at this thing. Look how much use. This is about our second time around.
Yeah.
You did a great job on that book, Jen. 2003.
Yeah.
2003, yeah.
I'm gonna try to get some more copies.
149 pages.
Yeah. I'm gonna try to get some more copies made, hopefully this week.
Huh.
There's a guy in Palm Coast that might make us a couple copies. We'll see. He's the one that bought the business that originally did it for you.
What?
Copycats?
Copycat? Yeah, but I don't know if he's still there.
No, Copycats is retired, but I talked to the guy who bought the business, and he said he could help us get more books.
Well, I don't have it.
He's in Palm Coast. No, we'll figure it out. We'll figure out a way. Because as far as I know, you got the last one.
No, I had 5 books out and never came back.
Well, I know Chris has one. I know Tommy has one.
Stephanie had one.
Huh?
Stephanie had one.
But Tommy has one in his mantle in the kitchen, in the living room. So he's really making a nice display of it. So he's making a hell of a nice display of it. He really is. He's making a nice display.
What?
Tommy's got it in his living room in like a trophy case with all his other stuff. Your book. Tommy up north.
What was the book?
Yeah, your book is in this case like this
All right.
in the living room. So that was a good thing by writing that book, right, Jim?
Yeah,
A real good thing.
I think so.
You look at Tommy from Jacksonville, the pilot. His girlfriend Mercedes says, "How come you're drinking so much milk now? Because you talked to your great grandfather, and he made it to 98 by drinking milk." So Tommy's drinking milk, and then Tommy keeps on saying he told all his fellow pilots. What did they tell you about the plane?
Yeah.
What did they tell you about?
He said, one way or another, bring it down.
That's what he tells everybody.
One piece or another.
That's what he tells, and all these pilots are all laughing. They go, "This is great. One way or the other, bring it down."
Yeah.
Tommy just loves to say that. And then he's studying about Russia, where your father came from,
Yeah.
and he was playing Russian music.
Vladivostok.
He was playing Russian music at his house in Jacksonville, and Mercedes, his girlfriend, says, "Remember what Paul's father said, we only speak English here."
Good.
So they had a great time visiting you. They had a great time visiting you. It was very educational for them,
Yeah.
and they loved to see it. And then Tommy showed your picture. You and him together, to Stephanie's father. You remember Stephanie's father?
Yeah.
You and him spoke a lot, right?
Yeah.
And Stephanie's father says, "I can't believe that guy's 98. He says, he looks so good." You know, Stephanie's father, you talked to many times. Remember? He goes, "That guy's going way past 105. That's what he told Tommy. He goes, "He's not going nowhere soon. He's going way past 105.
Yeah.
Do you remember talking to his father?
Oh, yeah.
You and him always talked nice. It was just that breakup between Tom and Stephanie that destroyed everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
It destroyed everything. But Tommy still talks to him on a regular basis.
Yeah.
They call him Paul.
Where's that lady going?
Huh?
Where's that lady going?
I think she's going into her room.
Yeah, Haverford, Dave. Haverford.
That sounds like a nice town.
Huh?
That sounds like a nice town. I'm gonna look it up tomorrow.
Haverford West, yeah, right out of the coast.
Before I come here, I'm gonna look it up.
Right out of the coast.
Unless you could Google it, Jen.
What's that?
Haverford West, and give me some pictures.
Okay. We got 1 minute left.
Okay. Well, I will show them Haverford West.
Haverford West.
We'll do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Haverford West, I'm gonna get some pictures, how it looks now tomorrow, and I'm gonna show you.
Boy, but it changed a lot.
Yeah, but I'm gonna get some pictures and a video of it, and tomorrow I'll show you.
Yeah.
Haverford West.
You wanna watch a little now?
Yeah.
Alrighty.